There's nothing more fun than when two beloved characters team up for an adventure. Alright, maybe there is something a teensy bit more fun, which is if they fight a little bit first. That's why writers Ben Acker and Ben Blacker, not even kidding, bring us this fun new Versus comic where the Merc with a mouth goes up against the hot Cajun wildcard. Let's see what they have in store for us, shall we, mon ami? Last time on Hell Isn't Others, Deadpool declares on the opening page of this comic, not in ponderance of any philosophical question, but simply because he's annoyed about the long line at a coffee place he likes. His pointless reverie doesn't last long, however, as he runs into his old friend Gambit while waiting in line. Immediately, their hands go to the weapons before they can even talk. Gambit asks Deadpool to step out of the line if they're to fight, but Deadpool is still trying to remember the last time they were together, which happens to be the thing with Spider-Man and Daredevil. This setup then takes us to a flashback to show us the last thing. At the New York Museum for Natural History, a little girl identifies Spider-Man, who seems to be admiring an old artifact. She asks him why he isn't out fighting crime, and he responds that on this particular day, he feels like taking advantage of all this city has to offer. Now, keen-eyed readers can tell from the skewed Spidey artwork that this is actually Deadpool in the Spider-Man costume. Our imposter soon gets hit on the head with a billy club, and we see Daredevil standing atop the artifact and declaring that he's mad at Spidey. He jumps to attack Spidey but gets dance moved onto the floor. The girl's mother takes her away and runs away as the girl declares Daredevil to be her 9th favorite boy superhero. However, again, readers can see from the beard and the eyes that this is Gambit in disguise. The two proceed to run through the whole museum and get outside, where Spidey twips away, leaving Daredevil's face covered in pants. However, Daredevil catches up with him and throws him through the Jade Dragon Gang's hideout window. Spidey's singing a song the whole time that's been stuck in his head. He says it's brainwashed him and asks Daredevil if he's been brainwashed too, since he's attacking Spidey unprompted. They jump out of the hideout soon, leaving the thugs in there confused and brainwashed with a song. They crash through some more windows, discussing what it is they're really fighting about. Is it a metaphor? Is it a difference in ideology? Is it meta-writing? Even they don't know. At least they agree that it goes on a little too long as they drop through a theatre, this time where a Hamilton joke takes place. Meanwhile, Matt Murdock and Peter Parker are hanging out at a farmer's market for some reason, but the panel is largely consumed by hipsters in varying moustaches and beards discussing vegan artisanal discourse that you wouldn't want to wish on your worst enemy. Matt and Peter dip out after hearing about the Daredevil Spider-Man fight and come back in costume, only to find out that everyone's blaming them for the destruction and mayhem caused throughout the city. They're both surprised at this because they were antiquing the whole day, which is kinda cute. In any case, neither are happy. Turns out, the whole thing was a ruse to distract police from Raul Chalmers' diamond robberies. Gambit and Deadpool celebrate a job well done, but there's a tinge of sadness. As Gambit mentions, there's always the inevitable double cross. He notices a gun taped to the bottom of the table they're sitting at and assumes it's Deadpool's. So, he charges up a diamond and shoots it at Wade's head, then runs away. Deadpool chases after him, too mad to even cuss him out properly. Now they proceed to fight for real. Gambit throws a manhole at Deadpool and takes a chunk out of him. They run through the hipster market again, and Deadpool gets hit with a charged pan, and they fight some more while retracing their steps. The real Spider-Man and Daredevil follow this ruckus, but they get halted by the Jade Dragons, who have actual dragons with them this time. As the two heroes get busy fighting the dragons, complaining about taking a day off for antiquing, Gambit finally asks Deadpool, why the double cross? Deadpool tells him that he wasn't behind it, and Gambit tells him about the gun. They both talk until they figure out that the intended double cross was another ruse to get the two idiots fighting so that they'd leave Raul alone with the loot. Realizing this, they run back to the safe house and find it cleared out. Chalmers has disappeared with all the loot, and Gambit and Deadpool find themselves facing up to their idiocy, which is pretty funny. Now, back to the present. They agree again to being idiots back then and decide to hug it out instead of fighting. Gambit mentions that if he runs into Raul again, though, he'll fight him. Just then, Raul shows up with 2 cups of coffee for the lads and a new proposition. The two idiots decide to hear him out. The score is a big one. Raul's last, supposedly, and he asks for help with it. Raul says he'll give them all the loot from the last job and much more. All they have to do is trust each other. Well, won't be hard to imagine how that goes, but let's find out how it actually goes. One last job. This issue begins with Deadpool knocking on a garage door. He thinks this is a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad idea. He reiterates to Gambit that he doesn't trust Chalmers. However, they both agree that they trust each other. That said, they immediately start bickering about not trusting each other last time, which can only bode well for what's about to come. The garage door opens and Chalmers ushers them in. Deadpool repeats what a bad idea this is. They go into a warehouse, which looks the same as where the last betrayal happened, and Gambit notes that all warehouses look the same to him. Deadpool jokingly calls him out on his warehouse privilege. Chalmers mentions that this is an incognito operation, so the two heroes will have to ditch their outfits for regular people clothes. Gambit says that might be an issue because of Deadpool's fried thumb face. Deadpool starts yapping away with offense at this, and Chalmers tells them both to shut up and listen to the plan first. They remind him that they haven't agreed to the job yet, and so Chalmers throws them a briefcase full of money, which seems to change their mind. Chalmers promises 2 more briefcases just like it after the job, and Deadpool immediately starts dreaming of himself as Scrooge McDuck swimming in money. As for the disguises, Deadpool says he's got an image inducer that'll allow him to look like a normal guy using a hologram. They briefly consider the idea of doing the whole operation naked, but Chalmers rejects it and pulls out his bulletin board to explain the plan. As Chalmers reveals, the plan is to go to New Orleans and steal a priceless artifact called the Dragon's Tongue from a businessman called Pung Lai. The tongue is in a safe box, which requires Pung's fingerprints. On the night of the heist, they manage to get 1 fingerprint first. The clock is ticking as Pung leaves for China in the morning. Deadpool, introducing himself as Steve Zahn, tries to get Pung drunk, but after 20 drinks, it's Deadpool who's drunk, and Pung is fine. He asks Deadpool to dance, and as they do so, Gambit manages to get 2 more fingers, which means there's only 2 more to go. Gambit's also managed to get tangled up with a girl who looks suspiciously like Rogue. Well, apparently he has a type. The group eventually goes to a restaurant, and Deadpool fairly warns the readers that if they were expecting violence, they might be disappointed. This is a con artist story, so violence will be rare. Good luck getting that refund, I guess. But then again, if you're watching this video, you've already saved a bunch of money, haven't you? Anyway, at the restaurant, some guy almost recognizes him, but instead ends up giving him a Matrix suggestion before jumping into a nearby pit. Turns out, this restaurant provides dinner and a show. The fight show, however, doesn't last long as Pung soon jumps in and starts beating up the contestants. As shit starts to go sideways, Deadpool and Gambit end up having to join the fight too, and the whole thing becomes chaotic. One of the fighters almost recognizes Gambit, but is incapacitated first. After everyone in the ring is defeated, Pung issues an open challenge to anyone else who wants to fight him. Battle Royale begins then, as all of New Orleans' villains jump in and start fighting. Deadpool and Gambit keep Pung out of harm's way, and soon Gambit has an idea to take Pung to another place. Pung says he's enjoying it here, but Gambit assures him that he'll love the next place. And so, they clear a path and meet outside, then head on their way to the next stop. Deadpool makes a joke about walking 500 miles and 500 more. Turns out, their next stop is Dr. Voodoo, who hosts a dead man's after-party for them. We see dead musicians' ghosts coming back and playing music together. They also magically spike Pung's drink, but it doesn't seem to work, as Pung disappears when Deadpool and Gambit are distracted by the music. Deadpool berates Dr. Voodoo for not making an efficient drink, calling him a Harry Potter type, and then also berates Gambit for not doing anything right. Gambit retorts that he's done everything right, and he knows where Pung's going. He tells Deadpool to get Chalmers and meet at the safe house, then asks Dr. Voodoo to teleport him. Deadpool also asks the same, but Voodoo has taken offense at the Harry Potter remark. Deadpool gives him $300 as an apology, and Voodoo gives him a cycle, not even a magic cycle. Gambit arrives at the Fight Club restaurant again to see that Pung is now fighting even worse guys than before. Gambit still manages to get the last print and sends it to Chalmers, who uses them to open the box. Deadpool sneaks at the window but is accosted by a bunch of Iron Fist-looking ninjas. They fight, and Chalmers reveals that the tongue is actually an ancient talisman that gives vitality to whoever holds it. Deadpool realizes that that's why it was so hard to get Pung drunk or drugged. He puts the tongue back in the box and gives it back to the ninjas. They bow and leave, after which Deadpool reveals that the tongue was actually a disguised Snickers bar he made using the image inducer. The real tongue is still with him, which impresses Chalmers. He reveals that he's got terminal cancer, which is why he wanted the tongue. They get to the safe house and Deadpool sees the other 2 briefcases full of money. The door opens and Deadpool assumes it's Gambit, but it turns out to be Pung, who's furious. He also notices that Chalmers has disappeared with the money. Pung then reveals that he's the immortal weapon known as Fat Cobra, who's defeated Shaolin terrorist priests, Iron Fist, an army of werewolves, and a giant snake dragon whose tongue Deadpool was foolish enough to steal. Upon hearing this, Deadpool whimpers for Gambit as this issue ends. A terrible night. The first part of this middle issue of Deadpool v Gambit catches us up with what Gambit had been up to while Deadpool was getting beat up by ninjas. It starts with Gambit running to the safe house as Deadpool explains that they're superheroes first and con artists second, which is perhaps why this con went so poorly. Gambit barges into the safe house as Wade is arguing with the Comic Censor Authority over the usage of screwed. Gambit says Wade won't believe what's happened to him. Wade says the same. Deadpool explains that Peng Lai is actually Fat Cobra, and he proceeded to break a lot of bones in Deadpool's body for stealing from him. Some of the greatest hits included the knife handle hand strike, angry Buddha's palm, punishing glare of livid fireflies, Thirsty Monk's rage toss, uppercut of the quiet stream, dragon hates bamboo, Thirsty Mon's rage hold, butterfly's lament, burning wok strike, golden face ballet, the glorious elbow of revolution, hummingbird's last breath, 1,000-year elephant palm, bamboo's fate is your fate, tantric nostril destruction, low-flying guillotine strike, approach of the five wisdoms, kick of the arc of the sideways crescent moon, and finally, vengeance of Fat Cobra. All of these are just different ways of saying Deadpool got his ass handed to him. Additionally, Fat Cobra manages to do a violent haiku in the middle too. Deadpool even calls it the fanciest beating he ever took. Gambit says he's just glad Wade is okay, but as it turns out, Deadpool isn't healing like he should as per his powers. Naturally, he's mad at Gambit for not having his back. Gambit then goes on to recap his night. He begins with the heroic rescue of Lai's entourage of women, meaning he slept with them. But then, while saying goodbye, his power involuntarily activates, charging up the rogue lookalike's hand and severely injuring it. Gambit takes the woman in his arms and runs out to steal a car and take her to the nearest hospital. He gets her into the emergency room and waits outside, wondering what happened with his powers. He discovers that they don't work when he wants them to anymore. Then Peng barges into the hospital looking for her. The ninja's attempting to stop him. Gambit avoids a confrontation and leaves before he can be noticed. Outside, he sees the car he stole being towed, and so he proceeds to steal the tow truck. However, one of the ninjas gets in his way and cuts the truck in half. Gambit makes it out safely but discovers that the ninja has then vanished. He determines that it's a message to him that he can run, but he can't hide. Deadpool mentions that he didn't interrupt the story once, because he's courteous like that. He also says they should get the hell out of New Orleans. They manage to get on a plane, where Wade is hiding his face behind a meta Ryan Reynolds magazine joke, and Gambit asks if he's still mad. Wade says yes, and puts the magazine down to reveal that he's using the holographic disguise to look like Gambit, but slightly uglier. Later at the hospital, Deadpool says he's justified to be mad at Gambit because he wasn't there to have Deadpool's back. Gambit says he carried Wade out of New Orleans, got him on a plane, and brought him to Night Nurse's night hospital to recover. Plus, he got him a coloring book and ice cream. Deadpool says he forgot a spoon, and that he's still mad anyway. Gambit says he did have Wade's back. Wade retorts that he was busy doinking a bunch of people. While true, Gambit defends himself by saying there was plenty of time. He then points out that this might actually be someone else's fault. He recalls the time the two of them sold the mutant criminal Scrambler some swampland in Florida. Scrambler thought he was buying a vineyard. Gambit decides to go after him and force him to unscramble their powers. A pained and recovering Deadpool insists on coming with him. Gambit asks whether it's because he can watch his back or because he doesn't trust him. Deadpool says it's the latter. They motorbike the way to Scrambler's location, and Gambit warns Deadpool not to touch him or he might get charged. Deadpool says he has no interest in touching Gambit. They eventually reach a cookout party full of powered people. Gambit tries to arrest Scrambler, but clearly it doesn't work. The bad guys all start attacking Gambit. Deadpool sits on the sideline and watches the whole thing play out. Scrambler escapes, and Gambit tries to stop him by throwing a charged hot dog at him, but it hits Fat Cobra instead. The pair of heroes are scared to see him, but unfortunately for them, Fat Cobra isn't mad and hugs them instead. He thanks them for saving one of his precious pupils. He relishes the fact that Deadpool survived death at the hands of the Fat Cobra, and Deadpool jokes about coming back stronger and something to do with killing a Diane Keaton Hulk. The rogue lookalike is also there. She explains to Gambit that she's fine now and she's become a ninja. She explains that Fat Cobra chooses champions, and he's chosen Deadpool now. We see in the background Fat Cobra charging up Wade. Wade notices that he's healing well, and he's all glowy and weird. On the last page, we see him suddenly dressed in an Iron Fist-style Deadpool costume. Fat Cobra says he's granted Deadpool the powers of Kunlun so that he may retrieve the dragon's tongue. Failing to do so, Fat Cobra will kill him. Now that he's feeling better though, Gambit asks Deadpool if he's still mad at him. Deadpool says, "Yeah, of course, you frickin' ding-dong." I guess a fortunate upgrade is not the same as an apology. Who knew? Scrambler Story. The issue of Deadpool v Gambit barely features Deadpool or Gambit, which is what the readers want, don't they? I kid. But we start years ago with the Marauders, a team of peer-pressuring mutants who are trying to kill Wolverine. They ask Scrambler to disable Logan's healing factor so that he can finally die. However, more X-Men show up and the Marauders leave Scrambler to go fight them. While he's alone, X-23 shows up and attacks him. In those few moments before unconsciousness, Scrambler comes to terms with his actions and the path he's chosen, and regrets what he's become. He has clarity, even though both of his hands are chopped off and his guts are spilling out. Luckily, he doesn't die. Instead, he wakes up in a hospital chained to the bed. He notices that he doesn't have hands anymore. A girl named Esme walks up to him and they start talking. She says her mom and grandma are having a serious conversation, so she's here drawing. Esme's mom soon comes and takes her away. Esme tells Scrambler not to do any more bad stuff. Just then, Jennifer Walters comes in to talk to Scrambler about his rights. Scrambler says that he's guilty and he'll do whatever time he has to in order to make up for it. Jen says that he can probably get him on probation if he's willing to testify against Scalp Hunter. Scrambler says he's in. Later, at a support group meeting, he talks about why he testified. He didn't want to go to jail if he could help it, and he didn't want to disappoint his lawyer or his new friend or her mum. He mentions that he's on a new path now. He works at a garage. He's got prosthetic hands. Esme and her mum Josephine come to visit him. Josephine and Scrambler soon start dating. He also reveals that his powers make it really easy for him to power and operate systems, so they make his job easy. This helps him get his own operation off the ground. One day, however, a teleporter shows up in his garage and lets Scalp Hunter in. He says he's not mad at Scrambler for ratting, but now he needs a favor. Scrambler refuses, but Scalp Hunter isn't ready to take no for an answer. They get into a fight, and Scrambler uses his powers to turn off Vanish's respiratory functions. He warns them to not come back and runs them off his property. While he's cleaning up the mess in the garage left by Scalp Hunter and Vanisher, Jen shows up to deliver the news of Scalp Hunter's escape. She assures him that Scalp Hunter won't find him, but then notices his bruised eye and asks what happened. Scrambler later explains that he didn't tell Jen the truth because he didn't want to get involved in this mess again. He has better things to do with his life now. Esme, Josephine, and Scrambler are out on a picnic, where he professes his love for her. He also mentions how good his new path is going, including having a regular new customer named Mr. Khan, a nice old guy who reminds him of his old teacher. Finally, halfway through this issue, Deadpool and Gambit show up for a page. Deadpool explains, while being harassed by gators, that he, Gambit, Man-Thing, and Khan, who's actually Chalmers, plan to do the classic con of selling swampland in Florida by making it into a vineyard temporarily. The con goes quite well, and Deadpool points out, exasperated and covered in gator shit, that this is all readers will be seeing of him in this issue. Anyway, Scrambler is happy to have a piece of property to his name so that he can provide for Josephine and, eventually, Esme. Just as Scrambler starts to find out that he's being conned though, the Marauders show up again and pick another fight with him. Scrambler mentions that they can't possibly be this stupid. Scalp Hunter points out that they're wearing collars that protect them from Scrambler's powers. Well, as the most obvious solution goes, Scrambler disables the collars and stops the Marauders in their tracks. He mentions that he called the cops, but his place was already trashed and he was in an insurance black hole. However, they couldn't take his freedom, but he vows that if he ever sees Mr. Khan again, he'll kill him, because Khan took away Joe, Esme, and his home. Cut to 19 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days later, Scrambler gets a call from an unknown number. It's Khan calling him to tell him that Gambit and Deadpool were actually responsible for the whole con. He even gives Scrambler information on how to find them so that he can exact his revenge. And so, Scrambler sets out on a path of vengeance. He goes to New Orleans and watches Gambit and Deadpool suffer, even as Josephine keeps calling him and leaving him messages for him to come back. Next, he breaks Scalp Hunter and other villains out of jail. Naturally, Deadpool and Gambit caught up to him. Scrambler mentions that he could have killed him, but each had hurt the other, and it all felt empty to him. He goes to Jen and says that he misses Josephine and Esme. Jen says that he should go back to them and apologize. Scrambler says he can't. He's a villain now. Jen points out that his heart's not in it. Plus, he's got a bit of money coming in because a guy named Chalmers has offered to buy his swampland in Florida. Scrambler takes a look at the contract, baffled as to why anyone would want that land. He tries to unscramble the legalese with his powers, and the contract turns into an Asgardian document. Scrambler is baffled, and as he calls to Jen, a voice tells him that she can't hear you, piss pot. Turns out, it's Loki. He's been masking as Chalmers and Khan, and now he wants his land back. He tells Scrambler to sign the document and get his heart's desire in return. Scrambler initially resists, but eventually he realizes that he's no hero, certainly not one that can go up against Loki. He ends up signing and goes back to his family. On the last page of the issue, we see Deadpool and Gambit again, kicking and punching their way through bars looking for Chalmers. He points out that Chalmers is just an old man, even with the amulet. He thinks, it's not like he's a god or anything. Cute. He's just glad he gets the last word in his comic book. And then the actual last word is had by Loki, who's happy that his plan is going to perfection. And there we go. Only one issue left. Sort of an ending. The final issue of Deadpool v Gambit begins with a sloppy recap from Deadpool about the 9 realms held together by the tree Yggdrasil in what is the 616 Marvel canon. He goes through a bunch of references including Lord of the Rings, Doctor Strange, Thanos, and the other cosmic entities, the Guardians of the Galaxy, and finally, the ones that are relevant to this story, Kunlun, the capital city of the Kingdom of Heaven, and Asgard. He also apologizes that this comic is not about a tree, which is indeed quite sad. It is about, however, the one and only Dead Fist. Yep, that's what Deadpool's going by now, and he's temporarily got Iron Fist's powers. He's violence haikuing his way through New York using his chi powers to look for charmers. After a couple of bad haikus, he manages to run into charmers, and they almost immediately get into it. Again, they go through a bunch of nonsense moves like the March of the Angry Tailor and the Buddhist bearings. The names aren't actually as funny as the stuff on the page, with characters breaking panel borders, slicing text boxes, and generally Looney Tunesing their way through a fight. Eventually, Gambit breaks up the fight by throwing charged vegetables at them, which is rather novel. He asks Deadpool for help with finding Scrambler so that he can unscramble their powers. Gambit's rather frustrated because he hasn't kissed in weeks, making him feel like Rogue. Deadpool says he needs to finish up with Chalmers first so that he can retrieve the dragon's tongue. Chalmers says that the tongue is hidden so well that it will never be found. Almost immediately, Deadpool uses his chi powers to sense that the talisman is hidden in a tree upstate. He asks Gambit to come with him, sensing that he shall find the end of his journey there. Gambit agrees, but only after making Deadpool promise to help him find Scrambler. Meanwhile, in Asgard, Odin charges the Warriors 3 with heading to Kunlun and figuring out why their emissary is approaching Midgard with a troubled mind. He mentions that this whole thing reeks of Loki. The Warriors 3 take upon this task with ambitions of glory and jump to Kunlun. Fat Cobra determines that they're not here in peace and senses that this whole thing feels like a larger game played by the god of mischief. Back in New York, Scrambler is chilling at a cafe waiting for Josephine and Esme when he sees Deadpool, Gambit, and Chalmers walking by. He freaks out but tells himself he shouldn't meddle. Deadpool gets serious juju from a tree in a park, which we learn from the Warriors 3 is an earthly iteration of Yggdrasil. They could start a war and end all reality. Fat Cobra assures the three to have some faith. Gambit stops Wade from harming the tree, saying he's got a bad feeling and they shouldn't trust Chalmers. Wade says Gambit's only doing this because he wants to get to the Scrambler for his selfish motives. Gambit tries his best to prove to Wade that he means well. Just then, Deadpool gets the feeling that he's being watched, and the Scrambler comes in to stop them. He says he couldn't just let this whole matter go. Gambit and Deadpool are both surprised that Deadpool's prescience worked. Gambit gets angry and picks up Deadpool, charges him, and throws him at Scrambler. They explode, and Gambit feels his powers become unscrambled. Deadpool also realizes his healing factor is back. Gambit, under the pretense of hugging Chalmers with joy, picks his pocket and pulls out the dragon's tongue. The two celebrate, and Chalmers is hurt that they're not planning to blow up the tree anymore. Since that's dealt with, the Warriors 3 decide to mete out punishment on Kunlun. Fat Cobra uses more fancy nonsense moves like the old Peking duck and the one-handed stallion kick to defeat the Warriors 3. Back in the park, Deadpool asks Chalmers why he made them think the amulet was in the tree. An injured Scrambler tells them that it's because Chalmers is actually Loki. Chalmers drops his disguise and explains his grand plan to a talking bird. It's basically a lot of complicated phrasing that comes down to Loki making a land deal in Florida to make a new abode for the gods. However, his plan was foiled by our two titular idiots and an unexpected human, Scrambler. In anger, he ends up kicking Yggdrasil, which goes against Asgardian law. The Warriors 3 notice this and immediately arrest him and take him back to Asgard. They apologize to Fat Cobra for all the trouble. Fat Cobra meets up with Deadpool and Gambit, who return the dragon's tongue to him. The quest is completed, and Fat Cobra takes away Deadpool's Iron Fist powers and offers them to Gambit. The Cajun hero passes on them, and so Fat Cobra leaves, promising to meet up and get drunk again. On that note, Remy and Wade also decide to go get a drink, remarking on their friendship and the fact that they were Loki's pawns for years. Deadpool's happy to have schemed with the god of schemes, and this also gives him an excuse to fill in any plot holes. Gambit asks what the hell he's talking about, and Deadpool says, "Forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown," as a reference to Chinatown. Gambit points out that references aren't jokes. Left behind, Scrambler thinks of himself as a hero in his dying moments. Except, he isn't really dying and gets a text from Josephine. The last page of the issue shows Jen bringing an injured Scrambler and his family to a vineyard that she says legally belongs to him. She says someone's been working hard on it to keep it in great shape. That's Man-Thing for you. Maybe this comic book was about trees after all. Scrambler says this fresh air will do him great, as prescribed to him by his doctor, who is the talking bird. On that odd note, the series ends. Marvelous verdict. Well, what do you know? A Deadpool comic book that's actually pretty funny. It's quite rare these days. It looks like Deadpool works better as a dorky sidekick to already fun characters like Spider-Man, or in this case, Gambit, than he does as a comedian to straight men like Logan. This barely features any actual versus action between the titular characters, but the writers are aware of that from the start and use it to their advantage. Making this story a grifting plotline with interesting side characters works, despite the main heroes being missed for large chunks of the story. While most of the jokes work quite well, especially the inventive ones involving Daredevil, Spider-Man, and Scrambler, there are some, like the nonsense kung fu ones, that aren't very funny and go on too long. In any case, this is a more wholesome Deadpool than the one you might find in other more murdery books that he stars in, which works well for the overall buddy cop and lightweight tone of the story. So, if you're looking for good harmless fun, this might be the comic book for you.